Hello and welcome to Dell's Gaming, and this is From the Depths, and once more I'm looking at changes and generally updates and anything that's changed on version 2.7.2.1, which I'm running at the moment. And after my last video I wanted to relook at steam engines. There was a couple of things that I tested wrong, but also I just wanted to have a look at steam versus fuel engine efficiency, power, because there's some things being written, and whether I agree or not is beside the point. It's a matter of let's have a look and see what comes up. Now, a couple of starting points before we go too far in efficiency and which is best. I'm not trying to say which is best, because I don't think there is a this is best for everything. I think that each of the power systems has a use case, and it depends what you particularly are after. That said, for myself, I am particularly looking at campaign ships, not tournament ships, so my emphasis would be slightly different to other people. And you know, what I will do, I'll talk about at the end. The other one is when it comes to fuel efficiency, we're going to base it upon fuel usage. Even though the steam engines use resources, I'm going to convert them over to fuel usage as a general common term that all of the systems can use to get in an effective measurement. First of all though, I want to repeat a little test that I did last time, which was looking at the three different sides of pistons. Now previously I had used 3 sets of boilers and connected them together, but what I hadn't taken into account is effectively this is a low pressure piston, this is a medium and a high pressure, so this was taking more of the steam volume than the others, so that's why it was, you know, working, seemed to be higher. So now what I've done is given each of them a boiler, all running at exactly the same amount, 0.09 on each of them. Let's just make sure that is right. 0.09, nothing's changed whilst I have been building things. There we go, 0.09. So power from each of them, small piston is about 210, 215, large 27, 210, about the same, and the huge is 212. So basically it looks like for a given volume of boiler there is no difference between the 3 pistons effectively. There is some other advantages on their rate of speed, in that this is running at 1.26 shaft rotations, this is running at 13, and this is running at 25, which could have an effect on how much you need to get your propeller spinning. Now obviously you can't have a bigger propeller than what is on that particular size, so you're limited to a 1 meter for small, I think it's a 3 and 5 meter for large, and was it a 7 meter for huge, a 5 and a 7. Anyway, so although they do turn faster, there's not really a big benefit for having a larger piston. Other bits, the larger piston is more resilient to damage if it's in somewhere that's going to get hit, so for that reason you might want a larger one if you want to make something that's pretty resilient. Let me just check that. If we look at huge piston as an example, armor 8, 9,000 health, and the smaller large, let's see, we've got, where are we, armor 8, 800, so yeah, significantly different. So if you want to make something that's very, you've got the space as well, and you want to make something very resilient by a lot of health, then use the huge. That may be an advantage of using the huge piston over the other ones. Plus also for propeller, you might just want that huge propeller rather than using multiple, say 3 meter, you might want that big 7 meter. Okay, so that's that one. There isn't an advantage for pistons. Next then, we're going to start looking at the efficiencies. And before I go too far down that one, just to show you what I'm basing my calculations on. So fuel for steam engines is basically resources, and fuel for fuel engines is fuel, surprisingly enough. So the conversion is, the assumption is that you're producing something at a refinery of some description. Now this is a reasonable refinery, not the ultimate, but it's okay, and it's effectively producing 14 fuel for every material spent. So you could build up a nice little stockpile and ship it out to your ships, or your ships start with the fuel on board, etc. Depends how you want to work that out, or create a ship that has this on board and produces the fuel for the fleet. There's reducing this doesn't make that huge amount of difference. The difference between cokers and catalytics is not as great now. If I was to increase all of these catalytics, it'd go down to 13, but would increase quicker. If I reduced the cokers a lot, it would still be around 12 fuel per material. So, you know, I'm sure you can get this even higher to some ridiculous rates, but I'm not going to use this base one. Now this is basically got a rate of 8 fuel per material. This is the 2-block refinery, which some might use in some situations or emergency case, but I'm going to use the 14:1 ratio in my calculations. The next question people will say is, but you've got to ship the fuel. Well, you've got to ship the resources potentially as well from wherever your home base is, because although you may get some resources after a battle, that's got to go into repairing your ships. There's nothing to say, depending on your settings level in the campaign, that the amount of resources you get will be more than the amount of damage you have to repair. And repairing damage is more important than fuel, so you have to repair yourself, then you've got to worry about fuel. So in my view there, you would have none left in your average battle, unless you're very lucky, to put towards fuel. So yep, in general you've got a net loss of resources for steam ships, so you still have to ship them from central supply out to your various fleets, etc. So that, I'm just going to say that cancels itself out. No real difference in that regard. Okay, next bit then. Let's look at the what can we do now. First of all, the most power dense, we'll say, system I could think of at the moment was like a small piston gearbox with a single boiler. This is set at a burn rate of 1, so it's using 0.6 materials per second, and it's producing 240, nearly 250 power. So that works out at 0.6 resources per second, 245 power for 8 volume, 8 blocks used, which works out to 8.4 fuel per second, 29.1 power per fuel, which is pretty low, and 30 power per block, which is actually quite good. That's quite a reasonable dense, not as dense as it could be. That's a bit small though to start building engines on, so I wanted something a bit bigger. Now, first thing is, does adding more pistons affect that power? And this is same burn rate, same boiler pressure, and basically it's giving out the same power. There is advantages in another way, which is the speed of the piston if the power demand disappears, which I'll show in a second. So this is the second one, the third one, to get up to a bit more power. And for all of the other engines we're going to look at, they're all based upon getting approximately 2000 power. That way we can look at the numbers and be sort of get an idea of what is good where based upon producing 2,000. If you need 4,000, either build 2 of the engines or double the size. You know, you can use it as a factoring situation. It's going to scale up almost linearly. It's depending on any changes you make, you might find it's not quite linear, but it's close enough so that 2,000 is also I think a good amount of power for some basic shields and a basic laser system without going too humongous, shall we say. Anyway, so we got a large boiler on this one, so that's 9 times the size. And one thing someone did put, and I did test it, you can use the small control on the other size boilers, which is interesting if you want to do that, maybe for looks or just save a block. Right, now this has got 2 pistons, because if you only put 1, you'll notice here the rotational speed is quite high. If I only put 1 in here, it actually overspeeds and goes too fast, so that would be a bad thing. Now, the other problem with being too close to your maximum speed, and even here where we're at half, is if the power requirement goes for your ship. Let me just take these all down to 0 so we have no power requirement. We can see that this is starting to overspeed. Which means these are taking damage. And potentially what could happen is, I can see that one's gone red, and there we go. It's destroyed. Even trying to put on a pressure release valve, the overspeeding is going to cause your steam engines parts to start potentially blowing up, which is not a good thing really. You don't want that. You want them to stay whole most of the time. So if you're creating steam engines, don't try to maximize the speed. The slightest change in the torque requirement, and they can overspeed very quickly. So you want to keep to about 1/3, I found, was a safe area. 1/3 of the maximum speed at whatever the maximum output you're after. Yes, you can create lots of ACBs, etc., to change burn rates, and you can use your auto regulate, but the auto regulate, the pressure does not change based upon the demand on the ship, or demand on the gearbox. So it would still overspeed even using auto regulate. It reduces it a little bit, does stop it over pressuring, but does not stop it over speeding. Speed is still a problem, and also auto regulate does not what's the best way, keep it necessarily, does not change with demand unless you start creating lots of control blocks to vary the required pressure based upon the load. Basically it's getting quite complex. You could do it, but you need quite a lot of ACBs. Quick little bit is, if you hear a load of noise in the background, I've just closed the windows, but there is a lot of bikes and other vehicles using the sunny day to go out and see how much noise they can make along the road, it seems, at the moment. Anyway, next let's have a look at our engine equivalents using this as our steam baseline, and then we will go back to the steam and see where else we can do with steam. So based upon this having the stats, so we'll just compare the stats. So this is burning 4.65, which works out at 65.1 fuel per second. So that's a power per fuel of 31 power per fuel, and 112 power per block. So pretty damn power dense, I've got to say. 112, that's very good as far as power density goes. But that fuel usage at 31 is pretty bad for this size. This is taking 18 blocks in total, this particular design. So let's compare that to injector. So injector engine, very simple one, nothing too smart. I'm going to just put up all the powers so that all the engines will start producing maximum power. So fuel injector, 2000 power. The fuel use is 57.6, which is equivalent to 4.11 resources per second. So it's less than that large cylinder. So that's 34.81 power per fuel. So it's better fuel efficiency immediately than the steam engine, and power per block is 80.2. So it's not as power dense. So yep, the steam has the power dense, but we're even at this rate we are more efficient than the steam engine. The steam engine could be varied, but we'll look at that later. Another design was just using the not inline turbos, the 1-point turbos. So this is trying to maximize the carburetors. Now these are not ultimate designs, these are just some quick things I threw up just to test their potential. Some people can work out all of the ultimate routing on various ones if they want to. These are just some designs I'll effectively be using, give or take, in my designs. So each of them's got 2 turbos and 2 carburetors, and there's a radiator just to try and keep them a bit cool. General statistics on these is that it's a volume of 115. It's showing 115. I've got down as 118. I think I must have changed something there, but anyway. Let's see. 38.4 fuel use per second. So 38.4 is working out at 2.74 resources per second, which is not bad really. That's a lot better than the steam engine straight away, no doubt whatsoever, and that's seen in the 51.98 power per fuel setting, which is not quite double, but almost is heading that way. It's a good 75% more. Power per block 17.4, so definitely down on the power per block on that particular area. So yeah, that's a slight down in that particular area. So not as power dense, but a hell of a lot more efficient. And yeah, so it's all down to how many blocks you've got available. But the ejector one is more resources and almost as power dense. Next one, supercharger. This is a low pressure supercharger. So I've tried to put as many shared carburetors and also shared superchargers as I can on this. So lengthwise it's worked out just a little bit more, bit of cooling. So we've got 2040 power, and it's using 22.5 fuel per second, which works out 1.6 resources per second. So significantly less than the steam engine. So 90.65 power per fuel. So it's 3 times more efficient, depending on where 300%, an extra 200% on top. So depending on which way you want to do it, the it's using a third of the fuel of the steam engine as an example, but power per block 10.1. So that's, you taking up all of the space is one of the problems with this, but good power per fuel usage. Final one is inline turbos. I thought I'd have a bit of a muck around with how many exhausts do you need to get the inline turbos working together. So it's actually just over 2 cylinders, which is a bit annoying. So if I show you what I've done, I've got 2 cylinders and all of the exhausts go into a single inline turbo, which goes into a carburetor which feeds both cylinders. So and all of these cylinders are feeding back to the first one, and then the first one loops to the second, to third, fourth, fifth, sixth. So having a quick look at this, if I go into key mode here, so we can see that's getting 325 maximum power out of that carburetor, and this turbo is at maximum fuel boost 15. It's caps at 15, which means it's actually passing on 29 gas points, or it's passing on pressure of 29. We go on to the second one, still 325, and we're still getting the maximum power fuel boost, and it's still pressure passed on 52, which is going up, which is unusual. I didn't think it'd be working that way. And again, we're moving on. It's getting 325, and that's pushing the boost on, and so on. So it's actually, at this moment, it is pushing through all the way through to the end. We're getting more pressure is being passed on. Let me just try one thing. So just looking at the graph, we'll go back to the full-on stats in a second, but looking at the graph, you'll notice there is this dip, and that is the point with the throttle setting. So if I go down at this point 3.4, the last turbo is not getting full boost, so it's not getting the full power from the inline. And if we take it down just a little bit further, take it down to there, oh actually yeah, we can see that it's actually got no boost at all. There's not enough exhaust coming through these to give you any boost to that last turbo. But if we do put it back up to the top, so it is now providing full power to all of the turbos, and I think you can most probably make this a little bit more dense. If you worked out how many of these you do need, you might find that you can do a bit of reworking to make this a little bit more power dense, but it's an interesting idea. 2051, 35 fuel per second, so that works at 3.34 resources per second. So it's between the injector and the other turbo system as far as fuel use goes. It's in between. What's that? Power per fuel of 58, which again is actually better than the other turbo system. So it's actually getting more power per fuel than the connected turbo by looks of it. Let me just make sure that's right. Yeah, 5.56. Yep, yeah, it looks about right. And then power dense is power per block 8.2. So I'd obviously worked something out wrong there. I think I changed it from my settings. So yep, 10.9, sorry, 8.2. So it's quite low. And as I say, some people could rework some of those exhaust manifolds to make it a little bit more power dense. So they're all roughly the same. It's similar to the Supercharger system doing this inline. Not as efficient, but yeah, between these two on my settings here, I'm just looking at it now, it'd be I'd mostly still stick with the Supercharger at this moment. It looks like the figures seem to suggest that there's not much between these two. Although they look like they don't use up as much space, it's similar sort of power per block. Yeah, might be a little bit better than the Superchargers, but the Superchargers still have that greater advantage in fuel efficiency. So I'd only looked at one steam engine here, which was the large piston single boiler. What if we go to the opposite scale? Because one advantage that steam engines have is ultimately variable. If you change that burn rate control, you can have any type of things in between. So over here we've got effectively the opposite end of the scale. So again, we have about 2000 power. I'm using 4 large pistons just to make sure it doesn't overspeed, and you You could use small ones, but again, difference isn't too great. And we've got here, we've basically got 15 huge boilers, and it's only running at 2%. So that's about as efficient as we can get this burning without being silly. And this is now taking up effectively taking up 400 blocks, whereas like this one here is only taking up 200 odd blocks. That was a bit more than 200. So it's taken up twice. So this is the opposite end of the scale, and it's using 3.34 materials per second, which is the same as 46.76 fuel per second. So that makes it more efficient than the injector, not as efficient as the Supercharger, and not as more efficient than this basic turbo, but not as efficient as the inline turbo. So it's somewhere in the middle in that regard, but its power per block is 4.93, which is terrible, basically. That's it's double the size of all of these. So the most efficient turbine is not the opposite end scale. It doesn't ultimately, it only scales into the fuel engines. So basically overlaps. If you're doing a curve, you'd see the curve of the steam engines come down, start up high and come down, whereas the fuel engines will start low and then keep on going up. So just so you know, it basically crosses over about halfway. There is one other final way you could do your fuel, and that would be using an electric steam or electric fuel engine hybrid. So you're using the fact that the boilers are pretty power dense, especially with a turbine, and then use electric for actually producing your power. The bad side of this is that the bad side of this is that the turbines don't produce any force for propellers. So they're okay for producing the force, but you can't connect them to any sort of propeller system, and you can't share the boilers. So but this could be good for shield, lasers, that type of system. Right, key parts here. Let's see, we're just slightly losing power. Let's just let it charge up. Bear with me 1 second. So with the turbines, quick little bit on efficiency. I tried here 4 different turbines. We have the compact, a small with 1 medium front and rear, and we've got 8 middles, and then we've got the large turbine. And the difference in efficiency when this was running at half a burn rate was within 1 or 2%. There was a minor advantage for having the bigger turbines, but as an example with the figures, the compressed turbine was compact turbine was running at 6,049. This small was running 6,169, so that's about 2% better. This was running at 6,216, so basically for all of those 1% more, about 3 or 4% on there, and the large was running at 6,231, so a few percent more on this one, slightly better than this. So generally so close, not really worrying enough to worry about so at this moment. So I'm just using the compact one. If you want looks, then I think the big one looks very good. Actually, it's going to give you a few percentage more, but it's a nice looking turbine, especially if you put the window block in. Anyway, back to this system. So what we've got here is a battery system which at 50% load, i.e. once it's down to 50%, it will be producing 2000 power, which is our marker point. Why have I set that? Well, the idea is you don't want the electricity to be all used in once and you're immediately having to go to the turbine. By having this higher power, it will take a little while before the power is all used up and we are needing to turn on the turbine. If I now just change the priorities, which I'll do in here because I found again it works. So if I change the priority here to up a little bit, you can see it's now using the power from the battery. And as the battery gets used, the amount of power maximum it can provide is going down. So it's going to take a little while for the 2000 power to get used. This is actually quicker than it would really be because we're actually requesting a lot of power with all of the shields I'm running here to generate power. But if you were only producing exactly 2000, it would take quite some time to get to that 50%. So we just let it run down. It's heading down, so it's almost down to the 2000 power level, which means it took quite a while to get there, which is a good buffer on the system. And once it hits the 50%, there we go, this boiler is now going to be set using 3.06 materials a second. Now this has gone a little below 2000, so I could set that a little higher, but this turbine should start to produce electricity, which is reducing the rate that this is coming out. And you'd balance the ACB to come on a little bit before 50%, you know, just to make sure it doesn't go that low. That would just take a bit of testing just to see how low you can set it or exactly the right point. But at some point it will stop and or reverse once this gets up to pressure. We can see we're at 900. So based upon that, once this gets up to the 2000, we can base the fuel usage on this boiler or the turbine for continuing to provide the power for the ship and recharge this back up to 100%. So although this, you could say, oh well, that first 50% was free. No, it's not, because you do have to provide that electricity in the first place, which means you're going to have to have run this even after combat to fill your batteries up before the next battle. One good bit though on this is you've got, you know, you could increase this reserve of course, but you've got a nice little buffer there for until you really need it. So you haven't got to use resources and power straight away. This is if your battle's over nice and quick, you could potentially destroy the enemy before you actually need the power. So we've gone down a fair bit, quite low at the moment now. And where are we? Are we starting to? It's just equalised now and starting to go back up the other way because it's hitting the same point. We'd obviously want to increase that a little bit. Anyway, based upon the usage of these 5 9-block batteries, the 4 boilers, the compact generator, I'm running this at 18%, so the boiler rate control set by the ACB is 18%. You can obviously make the boilers bigger, more efficient, or make them smaller, less efficient, quicker to spool up. That's a decision to make, but based upon that we're running basically a fuel per second of 42.84, which puts it better than the injectors, better than the single large steam engine, better than this huge boiler system here, so it's better than that. Not as good as the low pressure superchargers or turbos, so it's better than the standard steam engines, but not as good as the fuel engines at their upper ranges. That works out at 42 power per fuel, so again that puts us in that range. And sorry, 42, wrong one, 50.7 power per fuel, so that's, as I say, around the fuel efficient yeah, about the turbo range. That's around the fuel power efficiency is about the same as this approximately, which is as I'd expect, and the power per block is 24, so it's actually quite good power density this has got compared to the fuel engines. Only the injectors have a better density than this, so yeah, it's quite a good potential solution, I think, for this. And if you could combine it for once out of combat, stop producing the power using the turbine and maybe with the fuel engines or something, you know, there's a few possibilities there for usage. So too long, didn't want to watch the whole video. Everything's good, everything has a purpose, it depends how you want to design it. There's no one size fits all. Injectors are very good if you want power dense using fuel. This is very good if you just want power and don't worry about resource usage, tournament usage. I think the superchargers are going to be very good for charging up batteries out of combat and or your basic power usage without shields, etc. I think this is going to be the steam turbine electric could be a very good solution for rail guns, lasers, you know, providing that buffer when you need a large amount of power in a relatively short time. And you know, I think the battery turbine, I think that could be a good solution for that, maybe backed up with some either turbo or supercharger engines to recharge it at the higher rate. So let the turbine, maybe turn the turbines off at say 75%, or yeah, well, you know, it only needs to be 10-15%. Once it's going positive, no need to keep on charging up. Let the fuel engines charge it up cheaper once you're out of combat, something like that. I mean, there's a couple of options there. What will I be using and doing? Well, in the campaign I will be shipping my fuel because that's what's done, and also resources, because I'd like to do things around historical basis, and historically a lot of ships, especially the early World War I, World War II and earlier, were steam engines. Either we haven't got turbines produced for propellers, but yeah, I like the idea of using steam for propellers. And a lot of World War II ships used to have diesel electric engines for producing power for other systems. So I would be looking at using steam purely for propellers, and other systems use possibly diesel generators, yeah, in that type of system. And then later on possibly a turbine electric system like this for more advanced designs when I'm starting to look at lasers and or more modern ships that would use this for their power systems as examples. So that's what I'm going to do. And then priorities, using priorities, yes, I will be using some priority systems. I would change the priority for the electric in some ships. I may have a backup with my propeller based ones, so they have a low priority, so sacrifice a bit of speed for power in case one of my engines gets damaged. You know, I'll be looking at various items like that. I like the supercharger engines. I do like their fuel efficiency. I might find something which is a little bit cheaper than this. That's quite, it's not power dense enough for me. Maybe even a hybrid of some description, but I don't think a hybrid's really gonna work. The inline turbos, someone can come up with some really good designs, I think, on this. They'll give them a little bit of work on the pipe work, and I'm sure they'll come out with some reasonable designs that will be better than this. But I must just stick with fuel engines being efficient and or dense. This is ideal for aircraft, smaller vessels where I just need a bit of power and don't want to have to use all my resources up in combat. So I think that's about it as far as fuel efficiency and my take on it. I like the idea of the way that they've done with the engines. I think there's some work to be done, but yeah, it sort of makes sense. Everything has, going back to what I was saying, I think everything has a spot. It just depends what your priority is. For me, it seems to make sense in a campaign type of environment. Nothing's broken, everything has pluses and minuses, so that's good. It's not a fuel engines do everything, it's not steam engines do everything, it's not electric do everything. I think everything has a bit of a usage format, which means you've got to design it. There's no easy route to this. If you want to min-max everything. I don't min-max, I do things for design, but have fun with it. Until next time though, put down in the comments down below any other little bits that you think are useful. Next is going to be looking at jet engines and just aircraft and some of the new designs around that side. That should be a fairly quick one. I think then I'm only left with looking at the campaign mode, so that'll be interesting to see what's changing and happening there. Please click the like button if you think this has been useful, or you know, you feel that these little updates or my view on them is useful for your building and you can work with it. But as always, remember it's a game, so keep playing and have fun.